I thought it would be a simple experience, just one day as a waitress. But what I uncovered behind the scenes left me absolutely speechless. I walked into Maplewood Diner. Early in the morning, dressed in a standard uniform. Black pants, a white blouse, and an apron tied around my waist. I wasn't here as a customer. I was here to work. For one day, I wanted to experience what it was really like to be a waitress. No special treatment, no shortcuts, just real hard work. But I had no idea what I was walking into. At first, everything seemed normal. Friendly customers, coffee brewing, plates clinking. But within the first hour, I started noticing things that most people never see from their seats. 1. The waitstaff had no breaks. Between running orders, refilling drinks, and cleaning tables, the other waitresses never stopped moving. I expected short breaks, but there were none. Some hadn't eaten all day. I asked one of them, "Don't we get a break?" She laughed bitterly. Break? If we sit, we lose tips, and we need those more than a break. I was stunned. People worked 8-hour shifts with no rest just to make ends meet. Tattoo. Customers could be shockingly rude. I had always believed in treating waitstaff with kindness, but that day, I saw the worst side of people. One man snapped his fingers at me like I was a servant. Another woman berated a young waitress because her coffee wasn't hot enough. And worst of all, a family ate a huge meal, left a mess, then walked out without paying. The waitress who served them. She had to cover the bill from her own tips. It wasn't fair. 3. Behind the kitchen doors, a hidden struggle. When I stepped into the kitchen, I expected a fast-paced but professional environment. Instead, I found overworked chefs, a stressed-out dishwasher scrubbing non-stop, and a manager who yelled more than he spoke. One of the cooks, a middle-aged man with tired eyes, told me, "Most of us work double shifts. We're barely getting by." That hit me hard. The people making our food were exhausted, underpaid, and barely surviving. By the end of the day, my feet ached, my back hurt, and I had barely made enough in tips to cover a basic meal. And yet, for the real waitresses, this was their everyday reality. As I untied my apron and got ready to leave, I realized something. The people who serve us food, clean our tables, and smile through exhaustion deserve more respect than they ever get. So the next time you eat out, be kind, tip well, say thank you. Because behind every plate of food is a worker who's giving everything they have just to get by. 1 week later, the experience stayed with me. I couldn't stop thinking about the exhaustion in the waitress's eyes, the rude customers, and the cooks who worked like machines just to survive. So, I decided to do something about it. I went back to Maplewood Diner, but this time, not as a waitress. I walked straight to the manager's office and knocked. He opened the door, frowning. "You again? Thought you were just here for a day." I took a deep breath. I was, but now I have something to say. He crossed his arms. "Make it quick." I pulled out my phone and placed it on his desk. I recorded everything. His expression changed instantly. Videos of waitresses skipping breaks, a cook admitting to working double shifts without extra pay, a waitress being forced to cover a customer's bill. All of it. His jaw clenched. What are you trying to do?" I looked him straight in the eye. "Change things." I explained that I had already reached out to local news stations, that I had connections to social media influencers who would expose everything. He had 2 choices, fix it or be exposed. Silence filled the room. Finally, he exhaled. "What do you want?" I handed him a list. Breaks for staff, mandatory. No more making waiters cover unpaid bills, fairer wages for the kitchen staff, a zero-tolerance policy for customers who harass employees. He scanned the paper, his face tense. Then, after what felt like forever, he nodded. Fine, we'll start making changes. I left that diner knowing something important. Sometimes people only change when they're forced to. And while I couldn't fix the whole restaurant industry, I had made a difference in at least one place. So, the next time you eat out, remember what happens behind the scenes. Because the people serving you, they deserve better. 1 month later, I decided to visit Maplewood Diner again. This time not as a waitress or an activist, but as a customer. As I walked in, I immediately noticed the changes. The energy was different. The staff seemed less exhausted, more relaxed. And then I saw Lily, the young waitress who had been humiliated by a rude customer the day I worked here. She spotted me, and her face lit up. "You came back," she said, hurrying over. I smiled. "I had to see for myself. How are things?" She grinned. "Better. So much better." She explained how, after my confrontation with the manager, staff now had mandatory breaks. Waitresses no longer had to cover unpaid meals. Kitchen workers finally got overtime pay. Rude customers were held accountable. Management actually backed them up now. Then she leaned in, her voice quieter. "And the manager? He's different now. I don't know if he was scared or if he actually learned something, but he treats us better." I let out a relieved breath. It worked. Just then, the manager himself walked out from the back. When he saw me, he stiffened, but then, surprisingly, he nodded. A silent acknowledgement. Lily placed a menu in front of me. "So, what can I get you?" I smiled. "You know what? I think I'll take my time today." Because for the first time, I wasn't just sitting at a diner. I was sitting in a place where things had truly changed. And it all started with one day as a waitress, 1 year later. I never expected that one day as a waitress would change my life. But here I was, standing in front of a crowd, microphone in hand, at a national labor rights conference. Behind me, a massive screen displayed the words, "The truth behind the service industry and why it needs to change." I took a deep breath and looked out at the hundreds of faces. Activists, business owners, employees, and even restaurant CEOs. And sitting in the front row, Lily. She had quit Maplewood Diner 6 months ago, not because things were bad, but because she had found something better. She was now an HR consultant, helping restaurants create fairer work environments. I smiled at her before turning back to the audience. "A year ago, I worked as a waitress for a single day. I thought I was just going to learn what it was like. Instead, I uncovered something bigger: mistreatment, exhaustion, and a system that takes advantage of hard-working people." The crowd nodded, murmurs of agreement filling the room. But I also learned something else. I glanced at Lily again. Change is possible. If one person can stand up, if one voice can expose the truth, then businesses can do better. And today, I challenge every company owner in this room. Start treating your workers like humans, not machines. Because when employees are respected, businesses thrive. Applause erupted. I had no idea when I put on that apron a year ago that it would lead me here. That one shift had turned into an investigation. An investigation turned into a movement, and a movement turned into real change. As I stepped off the stage, Lily hugged me. "You really did it," I smiled. We did. And as I looked around at the crowd, CEOs reconsidering their policies, workers feeling heard, people ready to push for more change, one thing was clear. This wasn't just my story anymore. It was a revolution. 5 years later, I walked into Maplewood Diner for the first time in years, feeling a rush of nostalgia. This was where it all started. But now, it looked completely different. The staff smiled as they worked, not out of forced politeness, but because they were actually treated well. There were new policies in place: breaks, fair wages, protections against customer harassment. And the biggest shock? The diner had expanded. Lily, now the regional director of employee relations for a major restaurant chain, was waiting for me at a booth. She grinned as I sat down. "Feels different, doesn't it?" I nodded. "It's incredible. It actually worked." She laughed. "Not just here. After your speech went viral, so many restaurants started making changes. You have no idea how many owners reached out, asking how they could do better." My chest tightened. It wasn't just a single diner anymore. It was an industry-wide shift. As I looked around, seeing the impact of that one day as a waitress, I realized something important. Change doesn't start with massive actions. It starts with small moments, a conversation, a challenge, a push for something better. And as Lily handed me a menu, I finally felt at peace. Because the battle for fair treatment in the service industry had finally been won.